All right, so today we're diving into a book that was so scandalous, so controversial, it literally ended the career of one of England's greatest writers. I mean, he just stopped writing novels forever. So what was the deal with this book? I mean, what could possibly be so shocking that it made an entire country turn on one of its most famous authors? That's exactly what we're going to get into. The book in question is Jude the Obscure, which came out in 1895. And let me tell you, it was the last novel Thomas Hardy ever wrote, and for good reason. It was an absolute bombshell. But, to really get why it caused such a firestorm, you've got to understand the guy who wrote it.
Yeah, Hardy's own life is basically the roadmap for this novel's big ideas. He was born into a working-class family, his dad was a stonemason, so he knew firsthand what it was like to be on the outside looking in, thanks to England's super strict class system. He was ambitious, way more than his station allowed for. And on top of that, his own marriage was, well, pretty miserable, which definitely soured him on the whole institution. So all that frustration, all that personal pain, he poured every drop of it into this book.
Okay, so let's talk about the controversy. When this book came out, people lost their minds. It wasn't just disliked, it was hated. They nicknamed it Jude the Obscene. There's even a famous story about a bishop who was so disgusted he literally threw his copy of the book right into the fire. So you have to ask, what in the world was in this thing?
Well, to get to the bottom of it, we have to start with the main character, a young guy named Jude Fawley, and the one thing he wants more than anything else in the world.
So Jude is a poor kid from the middle of nowhere. He's an orphan, works as a stonemason. But here's the thing, he's incredibly smart. He's taught himself everything. And he's got this one huge dream, to go to university in a city called Christminster, which is basically Hardy's stand-in for Oxford. For Jude, this place is everything. It's the city of light, a symbol of a whole different kind of life.
And look, Jude puts in the work. He's busting his back as a stonemason all day, and then at night he's teaching himself Latin and Greek. He does everything he's supposed to do. But when he finally gets the courage to write to a head of one of the colleges, the reply he gets is just devastating. It basically says you should stick to your own kind. The university isn't for people like you. Just like that, his dream is smashed to pieces against the wall of social class.
But that's just the first major roadblock. It turns out social class isn't the only institution that's going to stand in Jude's way. His life is also about to become a battleground over love, society, and the ultimate taboo, marriage.
You see, Jude's life gets pulled in two completely different directions by two very different women. On one side, you've got Arabella. She's earthy, she's manipulative, and she basically tricks him into a terrible marriage. She's all about social convention, a total trap. But then there's his cousin, Sue Bridehead, and she is the exact opposite. She's his intellectual equal, his soulmate, and her ideas are so radical they're actually dangerous.
Yeah, Sue Bridehead is a perfect example of what people back then called the new woman. Think of her as a proto-feminist. She's fiercely independent, she's an agnostic who questions everything about religion, and she absolutely hates the idea of marriage as just some social contract. For her, love should be free, not something locked down by law. So Jude is caught in this impossible situation, stuck between the conventional life he's supposed to want and this radical free life that he and Sue dream about.
So eventually, they both manage to get out of their own miserable marriages so they can finally be together. But here's the kicker. They refuse to get married to each other. They want to live together based purely on love and commitment, not a piece of paper. And for Victorian society, this was a step too far. The backlash is immediate and brutal. They become social outcasts. Jude can't get work. They're forced to move from place to place, sinking deeper and deeper into poverty, all while trying to raise their children.
And it's right here, in the middle of all this poverty and rejection, that the book takes a turn to the single most shocking and horrifying scene in the entire story. So Jude has a son from his first marriage, this very strange and gloomy little boy they call Little Father Time, and the name fits. He's like a tiny old man who seems to carry all the sadness of the world. One day, Sue, who is pregnant again and at her wit's end, just murmurs out loud that having so many children makes it impossible for them to find a place to live, that they're a burden. And her little stepson? He hears her say it. The next morning, they come back to their room and discover that Little Father Time has killed his two little half-siblings and then himself. He leaves behind a small, misspelled note that just says, "Done because we are too many." Yeah,
This was the scene. This is what broke the Victorian public. It cemented the book's reputation as something truly obscene.
So, you have to wonder, what was Hardy thinking? Was this just for shock value? Absolutely not. This horrific moment isn't just there to be shocking. It's actually the key to understanding his brutal critique of the entire world he was living in.
Okay, so to really get what Hardy is doing, we need a quick literary term. There was this really popular type of novel back then called a Bildungsroman. It's basically a fancy term for a coming-of-age story, right? The main character starts out young, goes on a journey, learns some big lessons, and eventually finds their place in society. A classic example is something like David Copperfield.
Right, so Hardy takes that entire formula and he completely flips it on its head. Jude the Obscure is what you'd call a failed Bildungsroman. Jude's journey doesn't end with him finding his place in the world. It ends with total failure, alienation, and death. Every single one of his dreams is just systematically crushed. Hardy is using the very structure of the novel to make his point that for someone like Jude, in this society, a happy ending isn't just unlikely, it's impossible.
And with that, the book becomes this full frontal assault on everything Victorian society held dear. The class system, it punishes talent and rewards birthright. Marriage, it's a trap that suffocates real love. Religion, it's all about judgment and guilt with no real comfort. And gender roles, well, just look at what happens to Sue. It shows you exactly how viciously society will punish a woman who dares to think for herself.
And that horrific scene with the children, it's not just a plot point. It's a powerful and pretty bleak statement about religion. Some scholars argue that it's a twisted, horrifying echo of Christ's sacrifice. But in Hardy's universe, the death of these innocents doesn't save anyone. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a pointless tragedy in a world where God seems to be completely indifferent, or maybe just not there at all. After that, well, everything just falls apart completely. Crushed by guilt, Sue rejects all of her modern ideas and goes back to her first husband, basically to punish herself. A completely heartbroken Jude gets conned into remarrying Arabella, and in the end he dies, sick and totally alone, in Christminster. And the final, cruelest irony? As he's dying, he can hear the sounds of celebrations coming from the university he dreamed of his whole life, the place that never, ever would have let him in. So that leaves us with the big question, right? What really destroyed Jude Fawley? Was it the cruel, unbending society he lived in? Was it just bad luck, maybe even fate? Or was there something in his own nature, a flaw that made it impossible for him to ever be happy? Hardy doesn't give us any easy answers. And maybe that's why, over 100 years later, this dark, brilliant, and truly career-ending novel can still get under our skin.